In our last session, we described the evolution of America's war for the Greater Middle East during the 1990s, the tail end of the George H.W. Bush presidency, and then the 8 years when Bill Clinton occupied the White House. We traced two different storylines, which could each stand alone as a separate chapter in our narrative. The first storyline focused on Iraq and Iran, both, in Washington's eyes, considered major threats to U.S. interests. U.S. policy toward these two antagonists was known as dual containment. But a better name for this chapter in our story might be piling up enemies, since the effect of U.S. actions pursuant to containing a perceived threat was to exacerbate anti-American sentiment across much of the Islamic world. The second storyline focused on a sequence of terrorist attacks sustained by the United States between 1993 and the year 2000, along with Washington's bumbling attempts to fashion an effective response. We might call that chapter, Al-Qaeda Comes Knocking. But there was a third storyline during the 1990s. Call this chapter, Interventions on the Periphery. The escalation of U.S. military activity in the Islamic world found U.S. forces engaging in three specific military campaigns. Each of the three was relatively small. Each was relatively brief. Yet none of the three was trivial, even if the implications stemming from each were not clear at the time. The first of these interventions occurred in Somalia, a small, impoverished, almost entirely Muslim country on the Horn of Africa. Let me talk a bit about this episode, and then in our discussion we can turn to the other two interventions, both of which occurred in the Balkans. Somalia qualifies as one of those countries about which Americans, whether rightly or wrongly, know little and care less. Still, for our purposes, it qualifies as more than slightly noteworthy. Back in 1993, Somalia achieved brief notoriety as the site of an embarrassing U.S. military setback. U.S. forces entered Somalia looking unbeatable. They withdrew, having failed to accomplish their mission. From that failure, policymakers in Washington might have taken some instructive lessons. Unfortunately, civilian and military leaders alike chose to avert their eyes, pretending instead to enshrine the episode as a showcase for American military heroism, rather than the policy failure that it was. As long as the Cold War was underway, Somalia attracted Washington's attention only when it attracted the attention of the Soviet Union. During the 1970s, to counter increasing Soviet influence in neighboring Ethiopia, Washington provided arms to the distinctly non-democratic government in Mogadishu. A country badly needing assistance to promote economic development mostly got M16s, landmines, and recoilless rifles. The Carter Doctrine stimulated additional U.S. interest in Somalia, even if only briefly. As the Pentagon surveyed options for creating a network of bases in and around the Persian Gulf, its gaze landed on Somalia. The U.S. negotiated a deal with Somali officials to take over a former Soviet naval and air base near the Somali port of Berbera, and proceeded to invest $35 million in improvements. Washington also set out to court the longtime Somali dictator Mohammed Siad Barre, an unsavory character if there ever was one. Under Siad Barre's rule, Somalia was a police state that used rape, torture, and arbitrary imprisonment to intimidate domestic opponents. Here he is meeting with Ronald Reagan in the Oval Office. Fortunately, Reagan suppressed any impulse to describe the Somali dictator as a freedom fighter or to compare him to one of the founding fathers. Siad Barre did find favor with North Korea's Kim Il-sung, however, who saw in the Somali a kindred spirit and awarded him North Korea's Order of the National Flag, First Class. Yet as the Cold War wound down, Washington wasted no time in deciding that there were better places than Somalia to spend its money. The United States cut Siad Barre loose, and soon enough, the dictator found himself under siege domestically. When he was overthrown in 1991 and chased into exile, Somalia descended into chaos. In the early 1990s, Somalia embodied the concept of a failed state. Government effectively ceased to exist. Militias commanded by rival warlords took to the streets and fought one another. Civilians caught in the crossfire of what was in effect a multi-sided civil war fled their homes, creating a flood of refugees. Agriculture collapsed. One immediate result was widespread famine. As it does at least occasionally, the world noticed. Horrifying images like these began to appear in magazines and on television. Here, for example, is a dispatch appearing in the New York Times in July 1992, dateline Baidoa, Somalia. In the damp, gray dawn in this remote Somali bush town, 25,000 men, women, and children, their rib cages protruding, their eyes listless, shuffled with their last bit of strength today toward outdoor kitchens for a scoop of food. Hundreds, too feeble to eat, died while they waited. Red Cross officials estimated that as many as 2 million Somalis were in imminent danger of starving to death. A clamor arose for the international community to do something. Now, at this point in world history, international community was a euphemism for the West. No one seriously entertained the idea that China or Russia or Brazil was going to mount a major effort to aid starving Somalis. And the West was a euphemism for the United States, since no one seriously entertained the idea of Italians or Canadians undertaking serious action on their own. Now, 1992 was an election year, and President George H.W. Bush had no intention of allowing the United States to become enmeshed in Somalia's troubles. Whatever Bush meant by his phrase, New World Order, it did not envision more than symbolic involvement in places of marginal importance to the United States. So his administration offered money to fund relief efforts, but shied away from direct military involvement, especially from putting boots on the ground. Yet shortly after going down to defeat at the hands of Bill Clinton, President Bush, now a lame duck, reversed course. On December 4th, 1992, he went on television to announce a major commitment of U.S. troops.
The people of Somalia, especially the children of Somalia, need our help. We're able to ease their suffering. We must help them live. We must give them hope. America must act. Only the United States has the global reach to place a large security force on the ground in such a distant place quickly and efficiently, and thus save thousands of innocents from death.
So began Operation Restore Hope. On December 9th, the first U.S. troops splashed ashore at Mogadishu. In short order, there were approximately 30,000 Americans on the ground, supported by Allied contingents that together numbered another 10,000. Bush promised that the mission would be accomplished and all U.S. troops withdrawn by the time he left office on January 20th, 1993. The promise was implausible when he made it and would not be kept. One American diplomat opposed to the intervention had warned Bush that Somalia represented a proverbial tar baby. The characterization struck some as verging on being politically incorrect, but it also proved apt. Here's what happened. In the face of American and Allied military muscle, Somalia's warlords decided that they would at least temporarily put aside their own differences and make nice. So fighting subsided, militias disarmed, and with a semblance of order restored, relief agencies were able to move foodstuffs into the countryside and distribute aid to the population. The threat of mass starvation eased. Normalcy was restored. This was the hopeful situation that Bill Clinton inherited when he moved into the Oval Office in January 1993. The question facing the new president was what to do next. The choice he faced looked like this. With starvation averted, the U.S. and its partners could pack up and leave, hoping that Somalis might find a way to avoid once more descending into chaos. Or, alternatively, the foreigners could stay on and put in place institutions that would guarantee effective governance. That way, when the outsiders went home, their good deeds would not be undone. Simply put, option A was to turn Somalia back to the Somalis. Option B was nation building by outside powers claiming to know what Somalis needed. Clinton chose B.